What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Loki Season 2, which I can't believe is already over. Of course, it once again stars people like Tom Hiddleston, Sophia DiMartino, and Owen Wilson, but also stars some new faces in here like Ki Kwan, and has more time spent with Jonathan Majors, this time as a new character named Victor Timely, and we get to touch on everything that we saw before and what's to come. Let's get into my thoughts here. So I saw the last episode last night, and more often than not, I make it a point to try to instantly jump on the camera, try to sit here, write some notes, and just give my straight up thoughts on the season once it wrapped up. But after seeing the season 2 finale, I felt like I needed to let it kind of sit with me, marinate a little bit, go to sleep. I also had a headache, so I felt like I wouldn't have given you guys the best review if I tried to review this last night. So I decided to wait till this morning, and chances are most of you will probably see this days, if not weeks from now, based on how my viewership tends to grow. With all that said, Loki Season 2 has finally come to a close, and I say finally in a kind of a bittersweet way, because while it did come to a close and there's a lot of positives I have about this season that I really want to talk about, I think the biggest gripe that I have that I'm going to continually talk about with not only the Marvel shows but just the Disney Plus show model in general is the 6 to 8 episode model. I just don't think it really works, and I do think that the best series that has really been able to flesh out its narrative the best up to this point has been something like Andor, that had 12 episodes. That Star Wars series I thought was really strong, a little slow at the beginning, but it really builds up to this big finale because you have 12 episodes to breathe. And with the season 2 that we're going to be getting for Andor, we're also going to be getting another 12 episodes. So that excites me. I feel like that should be a little bit more of the model, even 10 episodes, because here we are now with a 6 episode season of Loki that genuinely felt like it needed a few more episodes to really expand on a few story beats. Now, of course, the criticism could be made that, you know, these stories are just essentially 4, 5, 6 hour movies, and in one hand I do feel that way, but on another hand I do feel like these stories are being built to be TV shows at times, and oftentimes just need more time than is actually allowed by this 6 to 8 episode model. So I really do wish that we would have gotten more episodes in this season that could have fleshed out some things. Of course, if you're watching this review, I'm assuming that you watched the first season of Loki, at least, which ended with Loki and Sylvie, of course, the variant of Loki, female version played by Sophia DiMartino, actually going and meeting the man at the end of time. He Who Remains, of course, being the first variant of Kang the Conqueror, the main baddie of this current phase or set of phases that we're in right now of this current saga, who of course we saw a variant of and many other variants of in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania via the movie itself and the post-credit scenes, which actually teased this season of Loki as well. Of course, we know that Sylvie ends up actually killing He Who Remains, with the first season ending with Loki coming back to the TVA, to a world that doesn't really know him. Things are different, and that's the teaser that they leave us off with at the end of the first season. So I was excited to see what they would do with this season. I think it goes without saying that there's been a lot of division across the fans since the events of Endgame and the various projects that have come out, whether it be one of these Disney Plus shows or the MCU movies that come out in theaters. There's been a lot of division, there's been a lot of divisiveness in terms of opinions on these projects, but Loki was a season of television that ultimately seemed to be mostly really enjoyed by a lot of people, and without a doubt was a highlight for me post Endgame. I really loved the first season of Loki. I thought it was one of the most clever and different things in the MCU, including things pre-Endgame, and I was really excited to get back to that world. In this season, we end up opening up once again, and as I mentioned, Loki finds himself in a time where people don't know who he is anymore. He has to kind of try to talk to Mobius and B-15 and all these other characters that he was spending time with in the first season and tell them who he is. But not only is that happening, he's also slipping in and out of time, which looks rather painful, oftentimes bouncing before and after he knows who Mobius and these other characters are. And of course, they have to try to find out how to fix Loki so he's no longer time slipping. Along all this, he's also trying to find Sylvie, who after killing He Who Remains ended up jumping into one of the timelines to just give herself a normal life. He inevitably ends up finding her working at a McDonald's, which had massive product placement in that episode, which was kind of funny to me. But yeah, he ends up finding her at this McDonald's, working an everyday job. She's kind of become comfortable with her world and her life. But he's coming to get her because after she killed He Who Remains, the timelines have just continued to branch. This device known as the Loom that's meant to keep the sacred timeline and all of the timelines in order is now overloading. There's too many timelines that are consistently growing, and because of this, all of the timelines are at risk. All of the timelines are inevitably going to be destroyed and become non-existent simply because she killed this one individual who seemed like a bad guy, but ultimately was, trying to keep all of these timelines in order. And so now you have characters like Tom Hiddleston's Loki working alongside Owen Wilson as Mobius. You have B-15 in the mix. You have Sylvie. You have even characters like Casey and some new characters in the mix like OB or Ouroboros, played by Ke Huy Quan, who are all working together to try to fix the Loom to avoid there being an absolute meltdown of all the timelines. That's the basic gist of this narrative. I am going to be doing a little bit of a spoiler warning at the very end of this video, just to simply talk about how the season ended and my general thoughts on that. But yeah, as far as my thoughts on the season, I didn't love it as much as I did the first season, but I still really enjoyed it. Week to week, I had a lot of fun with it. But as I said before, I think the biggest gripe I have with this season is that it just felt like it needed a little bit more time to breathe. It felt like there could have been far more story expansion and character expansion across maybe even 8 episodes versus the 6 episodes that we got. And while I did thoroughly enjoy the look and feel and vibe and the performances of this season and a lot of the crazy timey-wimey time travel elements of this show, I ultimately found it to be a show that made me want a little bit more this season, whereas I thought season 1 left me wanting more when it was over, but because I wanted to see what was going to happen next. But I was really happy with what we got narratively in those episodes, at least personally. So as far as Loki season 2, I just felt like there were some characters that didn't get a whole lot of growth. Similar to the first season, I think one of the absolute standout elements of the show is the chemistry between Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson, of course, as Loki and Mobius. Their time spent together ultimately is a lot of fun. I really thoroughly enjoyed their time together again in this season, having been without a doubt one of the standouts of the first season. Their chemistry absolutely still translates into this season, leading to a lot of heartfelt moments as well as a lot of great moments of humor. And these two in general, I would love to see Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson in another project where they're not these characters together, just because I really thoroughly enjoy their chemistry. As I mentioned before, Loki has to go and get Sylvie from a McDonald's on a timeline that she's just kind of settled down in, and this is a character that I was excited to see more of because I think that Sophia DiMartino did an incredible job playing the character of Sylvie in the first season. She was a very complex, very malicious, very selfish and broken character that ultimately over the course of the season, through her connection with her own variant, Loki, slowly ends up finding, love through Loki, companionship, friendship, finds that there's people around her who care about her, and even though she makes the ultimate bad choice at the end of the first season to kill Jonathan Majors, He Who Remains, she ultimately is just a character who wanted to find peace in her life. And so I was excited to see what they would do with her character in the season, and I think my biggest gripe around the season a lot of times is around Sylvie, because throughout the course of the season, while she is present, while she is there fairly early on in the season, I felt that she typically was just the character who didn't want to be there, who was willing to help but didn't want to be there. She didn't really want to help, but she knew she kind of had to. And because of that, she ultimately consistently just felt like a very angry character still. She still feels very similar to the character we first met in the first season. And while I can understand why she's like that at the very beginning of this season, I ultimately found that her character didn't have a lot of growth over the course of season 2, ultimately feeling like we're churning over the same kind of thing when it comes to her character, her attitude, and her outlook on things in that first season. Now, of course, that does change a little bit as we get to the very finale moment of this episode, of this last episode. But I ultimately found that they could have done far more with the character of Sylvie that I just felt like they never really did. I thought that Sophia DiMartino was great in the role again, but on a script level, I just felt like they didn't give her an abundance to do as a character that really allowed her character to go through an arc. And I think that I would say that that's a big gripe I have with this series overall, or this season overall. Loki is the character that gets the most growth, which, you would hope for because he is the title character, but there was this great sense that the other characters were there to to help kind of push the story along more so than actually develop their characters, with Mobius played by Owen Wilson without a doubt being the secondary character that does get the most growth. But ultimately I do think most of that just went to Loki, and I do think it's a mixed bag when it comes down to how the scripts were written on an episode by episode basis, but also the fact that I do think the show should have just been at least another 2 episodes longer to really flesh out some storylines. Now, I mentioned before that we meet a new variant of Kang in this series, and that is Victor Timely, who's played by Jonathan Majors once again. And this is the character that was teased at the very tail end of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania in the post-credit scene, which excited a lot of people in the screening that I saw, and excited me as well. And so they end up going back in time to find this different iteration of Kang, who is a far more docile, kind of dweeby, shy individual. He's not the big threat that He Who Remains sets up most of his variants to be. And so Loki and Mobius end up taking him to the TVA to try to pick his brain, since he is one of those variants and is meant to be just as intelligent as the various iterations of Kang, to try to get him to try to help them fix the loom so that the timelines do not get disrupted. Of course, since he's from the past, he's absolutely mind blown to see the TVA and everything that's going on, which does lead to some humor. Victor Timely as a character is a bit funny at times, and Jonathan Majors is definitely leaning into this bit of a nerdy character, which was not what I expected when it came to a variant of Kang that we were going to be seeing in the season. But I did ultimately enjoy Victor Timely in the season. But this was another thing too that I felt like they didn't do enough with, in terms of setting up what's to come with Kang and these variants of his. I just ultimately do feel like they haven't done enough to really set up the threat, other than saying that he is a threat. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is as close as we got, but one big criticism people have is that the Kang that we see in that movie is destroyed, or at least defeated, fairly simply, and this guy is meant to be the big bad of the upcoming Avengers movies, as well as the many variants that he has over the course of the multiverse, which I'm assuming is going to play a factor into those later Avengers films. But overall, I enjoyed Jonathan Majors as Victor Timely. I just wish that they had done more with his character. And in terms of characters I wish they did more with that I felt kind of were just thrown away, you have Ravonna Renslayer in the series, who's going on a mission with Miss Minutes on the side to go and try to get Victor Timely and try to connect with Victor Timely before Loki and his crew end up doing that. Of course, you have the actress Gugu Mbatha-Raw coming back to play Ravonna Renslayer, and Tara Strong playing Miss Minutes, and I enjoyed their personal journey to try to get Victor Timely. But at a certain point, they kind of just disappear from the show. I don't want to get too deep into spoilers, but they kind of just disappear from the show at a certain point, and they felt like they really didn't do enough with the two of them. So by the time we get to the end of this season, I was questioning to myself, why is Ravonna Renslayer and Miss Minutes really even a part of this story? I genuinely felt like they didn't really have a place in this season, especially as we got into the last couple of episodes where they're ultimately kind of just not even involved. They're just ultimately useless characters, especially in this last episode where I don't even think they're really in it for more than a few minutes max, maybe just a few seconds, to be completely and utterly honest. But one character I really did enjoy as far as an inclusion in the season is Ki-Hee Kwan as OB, or Ouroboros as his full name is. Really thoroughly enjoyed this character. He works for the TVA. He's kind of the guy who is down at the bottom of the TVA, who's fixing everything for the TVA. He's down there alone, and he plays this big, over-the-top, kind of eccentric character who's got a lot of energy and is very excitable by people, and he's very funny, and it's very Ki-Hee Kwan, I guess is the best way I can put it. It feels very much like, the various characters he played when he was a kid, and things like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or things like The Goonies. Of course, if you've seen him in anything, his excitability, that kind of big puppy dog energy that he has is very present with the character of OB, and I thought that he was a very just fantastic inclusion in this season. Loved him along the characters of Loki and Mobius, B-15, and the rest of the gang. I thought he was really funny throughout the course of the season, and I felt like this role was pretty perfectly written for him. He was a character I thoroughly enjoyed in terms of an inclusion of a character. He's not given a wild amount of depth, but he does have a utility in the narrative, and so without a doubt he was easily one of my favorite inclusions in this season. And what I can say overall is that I did enjoy the season. I found it to be a good time. I thought it was very well acted once again, with some great cinematography, some great musical composition throughout the course of the season given to us by Natalie Holt, who I think does a fantastic job with the music. It was one of my favorite things about the first season, and it's once again one of my favorite things about the second season. And yeah, just overall, I really thoroughly enjoyed the look, the feel, the vibe, the performances of this season. I thought it was really exciting week to week. There were great moments in each episode. I genuinely can say that I thought the season was really good, and it set up for some pretty exciting things in the future of Marvel. But based on how important it felt this first season was to what was to come with Marvel, and the fact that we still kind of lack that cohesion across all of the MCU different things that are going on, and tonally everything just feels so inconsistent right now. I was hoping that season 2 was going to give us a bit of a straighter path as to what's to come with future MCU projects. And while I do feel like it does set up some things with its finale, I can genuinely say once again that we have another project here that's solid, enjoyable. I had a lot of fun with it, but ultimately doesn't really feel like it's pushing down a narrative that's going to lead to something in particular. I felt the first season did that pretty well, and ultimately I just don't really feel like season 2 has really done that all that much. I feel like they really did with the finale, but it felt like most of it was really just about fixing the timeline, which a lot of times felt like we were kind of running in circles. And in one way, this final episode does exactly that. So overall, I do think Loki season 2 is a good time. I think if you're a fan of the first season, if you're a fan of Loki, Tom Hiddleston, Owen Wilson, Mobius, all these characters, there's a lot of fun to be had in this season. I think there are episodes in this season that are incredibly strong. I do think, similar to the first season, that it's one of the most unique things we have going on in the MCU right now. So if you're looking forward to that, it's definitely present. It's a very well made show in a lot of ways that has a lot of clever writing, some great humor, and some great performances. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I really do recommend it for anybody who's a fan of Marvel, who's looking for Marvel projects that can still keep them engaged. I think Loki season 2 can definitely still do that. But this is where I'm going to throw up my spoiler warning now, just to talk about the finale of the season. This isn't going to be a play-by-play, but just kind of seeing where it wrapped up. At the tail end of episode 4, we see that all their plans have gone to shit, and Victor Timely has been disintegrated in their plan to try to fix the loom. And it pretty much insinuated that the timelines exploded and that all of our favorite characters were dead. And so it just kind of ends the episode wondering, is everybody dead? Is all of the timelines and everything just destroyed? Is that the end? And ultimately, there ends up being more. And in the 5th episode, Loki learns how to control that issue he had in the first part of the season, which was the time jumping. He learns how to jump in and out of time, and so he starts to go back and learn everything that he possibly can in order for him to make sure that everything is right when it comes to fixing the loom. So he's bouncing to the past, decades and centuries, and trying to jump forward in time and trying to see what he could learn to try to fix that moment before the timelines explode and everybody dies. And so when we get into this final episode, a lot of the first part of the episode is revisiting moments from earlier in the season, as well as also revisiting the events of the last season, most notably the finale, with He Who Remains, who pretty much tells him that he knew this would happen. He knew that he would be time jumping, and that even though he was going to be killed, that everything would go to shit and Loki would eventually time jump back to right before Sylvie killed him to avoid that from happening. This all inevitably leads to Loki recognizing that he has to go down there to try to fix the loom, and ultimately he uses his powers to destroy the timeline, but then uses his abilities to reinvigorate the timelines, creating a new timeline, if you will, or a new loom, if you will, using his abilities to create a timeline of trees, or a tree of timelines, if you will, where he ultimately becomes the new He Who Remains, the man at the end of time. He becomes this person, this individual who is keeping control of and keeping power of all of the timelines. He essentially sacrifices himself so that everybody has a chance to live, that everybody has a chance to actually live a life on the timeline. And so that's how the season ended. And I honestly felt that the final episode was both clever and awesome, and also just felt like it regurgitated too much of the same things over and over again, and left me feeling like I liked what they did, but I didn't love what they did. I'm very curious to see where we move forward with this. I'm very curious to see how this ties into things like, Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars and the various other projects that we have moving forward with the multiverse saga. I'm hoping that we get to see more of this iteration of Loki. I hope he's not just kind of condemned to keeping an eye on the timelines now at this point. I'm hoping that they're able to do something with his character moving forward. And, you know, there's a lot of questions I have. I think ultimately it's meant to kind of keep you guessing as to what's to come, while also giving you a big answer that he has, you know, essentially sacrificed himself to be the man who's at the end of time. He who remains is now Loki in a way. But I'm curious what this means for the future of the Kang variants, and for the future of our Loki characters in this series, and for the future of, again, the Avengers films that are to come. I have a lot of questions, but I ultimately can say that I found it to be a strong season in a lot of ways that had me scratching my head at times. It ultimately wasn't as strong as the first season. So I'm going to wrap up my thoughts now. I feel like I've been rambling for the longest time. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts on Loki Season 2, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about Loki Season 2. Did you like the season? Did you not like the season? And what did you guys think about that final episode and how it all wrapped up? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below in the comment section, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.